Good morning, everyone. I'm going to introduce the next speaker is Liz Menkes. She's a professional EMF consultant in the San Francisco Bay Area and one of only a few certified building biology environmental consultants in the country. She is also a certified electromagnetic radiation specialist, having completed an advanced training program in 2014. Liz has been doing EMF home and office inspections since 2011. She was trained on the building biology protocol for measuring and mitigating EMFs. So let's give a warm welcome to Liz.
Good morning. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today about this very important subject. So, what are EMFs? So, every electrical device emits an electromagnetic field, and they're all in a wave formation, and they're measured in cycles or hertz per second. And they're classified on the electromagnetic spectrum by their frequency. So we start off at the very low end of the electromagnetic spectrum with what are called extremely low frequencies. And one example of that is power lines. And you keep going up the spectrum and you get to radio waves and microwaves. And these are used fairly synonymously with wireless. And then you keep going up the spectrum until you get to X-rays and gamma rays. And we use the term EMF as a general catch-all for several man-made frequencies that we measure in people's homes. And there's 4 types of EMFs that I measure in people's homes. And I know that 5G is of a big concern to many people in this audience. And I will be talking about what is 5G, what it's not, what are some of the misconceptions about it. But first, what I wanted to do is give you an overview of the 4 types of EMFs. And that way you'll have the big picture of what can affect you. Because all of these EMFs have similar kinds of effects on people. And I'm going to talk about that as well. So the 4 kinds of EMFs that we measure are magnetic fields, and this is like from power lines or faulty wiring in your home. Electric fields are from the wiring in your walls and cords that are plugged in, and radio frequency is wireless, and then dirty electricity comes from things it's high-frequency spikes that ride along on the wiring in your walls. And I'm going to talk about these in a little more detail. Okay, so magnetic fields. I mentioned that these are extremely low frequencies, and common sources are high-voltage power lines as well as faulty wiring in your home. And I had this one client, and she had had chronic fatigue for 10 years. And she had been a nationally ranked rower, and it was all she could do to get out of bed to teach a part-time yoga class. She had difficulty sleeping and also non-specific anxiety. And when I came to her home, I found really high magnetic fields in her bedroom, her family room, and her kitchen. And when we turned off all the breakers, those magnetic fields completely went away. So then I knew it was coming from the wiring in her home. So we temporarily turned off one of the breakers at night that affected the sleep area. And she said she slept better that night than she had in years. And over the next couple weeks, as the wiring was repaired, she said she was regaining her strength and starting to feel much better. And I just got an email from her the other day. She had sold her house and now she was traveling the world. So that was one of the more dramatic experiences that I had with magnetic fields. And magnetic fields were classified as a possible carcinogen by the World Health Organization in 2001 because of increased risk for leukemia. And this was based on people who lived near high voltage power lines, and it was childhood leukemia. There's many other types of effects related to magnetic fields. Okay, so electric fields are from the wiring in the walls and cords that are plugged in. And they're always there as long as your breakers are turned on. And I want to give you one story. This was kind of an interesting one. I had a client, well, first of all, electric fields suppress melatonin production, so you can see how they can be linked to sleep. And also one of the risk factors for Alzheimer's and breast cancer is low levels of melatonin. So you can see how it could be linked to that as well. So I had this client who called me, and she said that she just couldn't sleep. And the only way she could sleep was she had this conductive bed canopy, and she just would literally wrap herself in it, and that's the only way she could get some sleep. And she thought it was she could see a cell tower in the distance out the window. So she thought that was the issue. And when I came to her house, I found that the cell tower exposure was really pretty low, but the electric field exposure was very high. It just happened that her bed was against a shared wall with another unit. So there was the wiring in the walls for her unit, plus the wiring in the walls for the other unit. So what we did, we just moved the bed to the other side of the room, and we did a couple of other things. And after that, she slept fine and didn't need to wrap herself in the bed canopy anymore. So see all kinds of interesting things. So dirty electricity. Dirty electricity is high-frequency spikes that ride along on the wiring in the walls. And it's created by alternating current, or AC. So anything that uses AC, like a toaster, an oven, is going to produce some dirty electricity. But certain things produce much more dirty electricity than others, like compact fluorescent lights, dimmer switches, heavy motors, and solar inverters are actually, what converts DC to AC, if you have a solar installation, can produce really high levels of dirty electricity. And I'm a huge fan of solar, and it can be done in a clean way, but oftentimes it's not. And there's several products, or not products, but systems that I've tested that I know are clean. So for example, N-phase microinverters, the IQ7, IQ8, and IQ9, those are clean. And I've also tested the Solar Edge HD Wave, the SE model, and those are clean as well. So if you're going to get solar, it's good to get one that's clean. I had an interesting story about dirty electricity. I had this one client who called me, and she had a chronic rash over her whole body, and she'd had this for over a year. And she'd been to like 10 doctors, and none of them could figure out what it was, and she had been told it was an autoimmune disease. And I came out there, and I found really high levels of dirty electricity. And I believed it was coming from the outside up. So dirty electricity can come from your devices. It can also come in on the electricity that's being delivered to your house as a result of what's being produced by your neighbor's devices. And so I also believed it was coming, her neighbor had installed solar just about a year prior to that. And so I suspected that that might have been the cause. And so what we did is we put in these inexpensive filters at the main panel to block the dirty electricity. And within a week, her rash started getting better. And within about a couple of months, it had just about gone away, about 90%. So she was a believer after that. So wireless is the one I'm going to focus on the most today, because that's the one that is just increased exponentially over the past few years. So why should you be concerned? So in 2011, the World Health Organization classified radio frequency or wireless as a possible carcinogen. And this was because of evidence of increased risks for brain tumors. And brain tumors are now the leading type of cancer among children and adolescents. And also, about 3 years ago, the National Toxicology Program, they released, it was a $25 million study where rats were exposed to wireless. And after only 2 years of intermittent exposure, 1 in 12 male rats got either a brain tumor, a heart tumor, or a precancerous lesion. And this was very consistent with what the World Health Organization's studies had shown. The World Health Organization classification was based on epidemiological studies, and the National Toxicology Program's studies was based on rats that were actually exposed in cages. So U.S. medical groups are also speaking out about this issue. The California Medical Association, American Academy of Pediatrics, American Academy of Environmental Medicine, they've all published either letters or resolutions calling for a reduction in exposures. But it just really hasn't gotten down to the rank and file doctors for the most part. They are becoming more aware of it, but many just still are not aware of this issue. So what does the science say? One of my favorite sources of information is called the Bioinitiative Report. And what this is a group of the world's leading EMF researchers and scientists. They got together and they reviewed all of the peer-reviewed studies to date. And they did this first in 2007 and then again in 2012. And as of 2012, there were close to 4,000 studies. And this group of scientists, there was no ties to the wireless industry. So people regard it as true and independent. And they showed in this report where they found strong evidence, where they didn't find strong evidence. And the full report is about 500 pages, but there's also what's called a summary for the public, which is 18 pages. And there's a link to this on my website. It's one of my favorite things to share with people if they want to learn more about this issue, or also to give it to their friends and family. So the Bioinitiative Report has chapters, and each of these chapters was written by an expert in that particular area. So there's evidence of damage to sperm, reproductive damage, evidence of autism. I work with a pediatrician in Walnut Creek, and she's had a lot of success with her autistic patients by having them reduce their exposures. Evidence of brain tumors, evidence of leukemia, Alzheimer's, DNA damage, evidence of breast cancer. There's many different reported health effects, immune, cardiac. It's pretty much across the board in terms of the types of health effects that wireless has been associated with. So what are the symptoms of overexposure or sensitivity to EMFs? And first of all, I want to say that these are general symptoms that can be caused by many things. So even if I measure really high levels of exposure in someone's home, and even if they have all the symptoms in the book, I can never say that this is causing their symptoms. All I can do is recommend that they reduce their exposures and then see how they feel. So I've listed these in terms of what I see most common. And difficulty sleeping is probably number one. And then the fatigue, muscle weakness, and then the difficulty concentrating. And people often will tell me brain fog. And to me, that's almost like a key word. When I hear brain fog, I'm already thinking that they could be affected by this. The headaches, the irritability, anxiety, agitation, and stress. I know that the last speaker also talked about this, that she sees a lot of this in her practice. And I especially see this associated with wireless and dirty electricity. So when it's gotten to the point, and it's gotten to the point where I can almost, when people tell me their symptoms, I'm already starting to think, well, which EMF could that be? And a colleague of mine who'd been doing this about 10 years longer than me when I was first starting out, he told me that, and I just didn't believe it. And now I've been doing it for a number of years, and I'm starting to already be thinking about that. The ringing in the ears, the ear pain, the heart palpitations and chest pain. Typically, people will have like the first four. I see that kind of across the board. And then the others, everybody's different. So some people might have the heart palpitations, others might have the ringing in the ears. So more symptoms, the skin rashes, facial flushing, balance problems, the eye pain, the sharp stabbing pains. How many of you, when you use your cell phone, if you feel a tingling in your hand, or you might even have a little pain in your hand when you use your cell phone? So that's a common symptom of overexposure to the wireless exposure. The sinus problems, nosebleeds, nausea, and hyperactivity, especially in children. So oftentimes people think that, well, we'll know in about 5 years if brain tumors really are caused by wireless. But what I tell people is that electrical sensitivity, it's really a here and now issue. It's affecting so many people. And I'll talk about that a little bit. But first of all, I wanted to say it's recognized by the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. So people can ask for accommodations in the workplace. And there's now a medical diagnostic code for exposure to non-ionizing radiation. The best source of information, one of my favorite sources, is Dr. Erica Mallory's Blythe's report on electrical sensitivity. And this is also posted on my website. Dr. Erica Mallory Blythe is a physician in England, and her full report is about 80 pages, but the first 7 pages gives a summary of her findings, and the rest of it is her sources of information. So it's estimated about 30% of people are moderately sensitive. So for example, they might have some difficulty sleeping, some difficulty concentrating, maybe some headaches, and they just haven't connected the dots that this could be caused by EMFs. And about 3% are extremely sensitive. And this is to the point where they're having trouble using their computer. They have trouble, they get headaches within maybe 10 minutes, or they'll get sharp stabbing pains when they try and use a computer. They know, or have the same thing with using a cell phone, they know that they are very sensitive to this. I have some clients, one is a teacher who became overexposed from probably the router in her classroom that was over her head, and also she had really high levels of exposure in her apartment, and she still can't live indoors. She's had to basically camp to feel good and start to heal. The good news is that this is very reversible from what I've seen. I've seen people with difficulty sleeping where literally overnight they can sleep better, or within a couple of weeks they can start to feel like the brain fog is going away. And people who are maybe the most sensitive, it can take them longer. I've heard 6 months or a year. Everybody's different, but it is reversible from everything that I see with my clients. So there's some common misconceptions about wireless. And I hear this from people, and they'll tell me, it's everywhere, there's nothing I can do. And yes, it is true that it's everywhere, but you can control it within your own home. And that's where it's the most important, because that's where you sleep and where your body heals and recovers. And I show people over and over, when we turn off the devices in their own home, so these signals drop off really quickly with distance. And so when we turn off the devices, the wireless devices in people's own homes, I can show people that the levels will just drop like a rock. And along the lines of that same misconception, people will say, I can see 10 Wi-Fi networks around me. What's the point of reducing my own? Well, those other networks, it only takes a very low level to see a network that's around you. And so usually your neighbor's devices are not as serious an issue, except if you live in an apartment and your neighbor's router, especially if it's very close to your walls, then you can have really high levels of exposure from that. But even there's ways to shield it, and there's ways to have a low EMF home. It's I would say in the Bay Area, probably 95% of the homes that I visit, we can get to be a really low EMF home. So another common misconception are that cell towers are the biggest source of wireless exposure in your home. And yes, if there is a cell tower outside your bedroom window, that would be probably the highest exposure in your home. But the signal drops off real quickly. So if you're a block or couple blocks away from a cell tower, it's usually not a significant issue. Unless you're up on a hill and you're more in direct line to the cell tower, then it can be more powerful. But I would say that almost always it's the devices in your own home. I don't think I've ever seen a situation, if I'm standing near a wireless router in someone's home, I've never seen a situation where a cell tower is higher than that wireless router. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the exposures and what you get from the various devices. So what do the numbers mean? And this is just a frame of reference as I talk about different devices. So over 1,000 microwatts per meter squared is the building biology extreme concern for the sleep areas. So just remember, over 1,000 extreme concern, sleep areas. So some common sources of exposure. Your cell phone, like an iPhone, if you're holding that phone like this, and it's about 1.5 feet from your body, I typically measure that at about 15,000 to 20,000. And so some people think that, and it is better to hold it in your hand than to hold it to your ear. And people think that it's safe to hold it in your hand, and I would disagree with that. The other thing is your hand itself is getting exponentially higher exposure. It could be like 1 million or 2 million at your hand. Cordless phones are also really big exposure. And that's kind of a little sneaker because people are not thinking about that cordless phone. And it's the base station, the one that has the answering machine on it, it's emitting constantly. So if you've got a cordless phone in your kitchen, you're probably getting 10,000 to 50,000 from that cordless phone. Sometimes I can find that on a nightstand, right where someone is sleeping. Computers, iPads, laptops. Again, if I'm about this distance from a Wi-Fi enabled laptop or computer, I might get about 20,000 to 70,000. And people are on these for hours every day. They're on their cell phones every day. Wireless routers have gotten more and more powerful over the years, especially the all-in-one modem routers that you might see, for example, from Comcast or AT&T. They've got 2 transmitters in them. And I've measured some of those at, if you're really close to it, 400,000. I've measured one at over 1 million. They're very, very powerful. Smart meters, especially, those can be an issue if you've got a bank of them on your, if you're in an apartment and there's a bank of them on your bedroom wall, that's a really serious issue. When I'm about 3 feet away from them on the outside, I'll get about 18,000. So if it's in your, if you're in a bedroom and it's on the wall, I might get 2,000 to 5,000 for that. The one thing I do want to say about exposures, I am measuring, because of my meters, I'm only measuring the power density. But there's other things related to these frequencies that can really bother people. Some people are more sensitive to one type of frequency than another. And the other thing is there's something called modulation. And this is how the signal is sent. It's very technical. So from, for example, cell towers. And as the antennas are being advanced, they're becoming more and more modulated in terms of how the data is sent. So some people, I'm hearing, they might be okay with an antenna out, not too far from their home. That wasn't bothering them. And then when the carrier upgraded it, let's say to 4G LTE advanced, then they find that it really bothers them. So there's just different things about these frequencies that bother people. It's not an exact science for us, and we just do the best we can to help people reduce their exposures. Baby monitors, that one is sort of breaks my heart when I go in. I'm a parent, and it breaks my heart when I go into a home and I find a baby monitor right on the side, where the baby sleeps, because that's emitting a high exposure. And I can measure 10,000 to 20,000 at the baby's crib if it's in the middle of the room and the monitor is off to the side. But also, let's say the mom has it on her nightstand by her bed. She's also getting about 20,000 from that as well. Very serious issue. There's one baby monitor that I've measured, and it's from Angel Care, and it's a low RF, low radiation monitor. And it really is. It only emits a high signal when the baby cries. So I've actually measured that one. So that's what I recommend. Or, parents have raised children for hundreds of thousands of years without baby monitors. I did, and the children survived. So I say also, use your ears. It's okay. Your children will survive and thrive. TVs, internet TVs emit a high amount of RF. I can get about 10,000 from that. And cell towers, too, can be high exposures. So what can you do to reduce your exposures? Best thing you can do is hardwired Ethernet cable instead of wireless. Or you can move your router or turn it off at night. Distance is your friend. The further away you can get it, the better. And while hardwired Ethernet cable is the best, there's also a way that you can have internet connection over the electrical wiring in your walls. And so sometimes people can't run Ethernet cable, or it's cost prohibitive, especially if they're in a multi-story home and it would cost them tens of thousands of dollars to rip open walls and install Ethernet cable. So there is a way that you can, as I said, have internet connection over the electrical wiring. And you'll plug this little device in where your router is, and then you plug another one of these devices in where where you want to have the access, another place in your house, and then you've got the connectivity in that other location. And laptops and even iPads can be hardwired. Use a corded phone, and the one that I like the best, it's AT&T corded phone. CL4940 is the model, and it has answering machine, caller ID, and speakerphone. And you can also opt out or shield your smart meter. And as I was mentioning, avoid using baby monitors. And I've just mentioned some of the most common devices or electronics that I find in people's homes. But I go into homes and I'm just amazed at the things that I find. It's more and more devices, and people have no idea how powerful they are. Like Alexa, you'll get about 10,000 from that if it's in your kitchen. I've found things like wireless tennis shoes. And I had thought I turned off everything in the house and I was still seeing a signal. And I finally figured out where it was coming from. And it was those sneakers. So I just never know what I'm going to find in people's homes. Use your cell phone more safely. Speakerphone, text, or air tube headset. And also keep your phone away from your bedside unless it's in airplane mode. Another thing you can do is you can forward your cell phone to a corded phone and you can turn it off at night. And you can avoid using your cell phone when in a car, bus, or train because the metal is reflecting the exposure back, and so you're getting a higher exposure. The other thing is that iPhones and even iPhones can be hardwired. And so you can do, when you're at home, you can do just about everything on your iPhone hardwiring it. And the way that I recommend, there's different ways that people come up with hardwiring an iPhone. And the trick is, so they're now connected with Ethernet cable. When you do that, you can have really high electric fields. So what can happen is you eliminate the wireless, but now you've replaced it with another EMF, which is really high electric fields. So I wanted to tell you the best way that I have found, it's really important when you hardwire an iPhone that it can be grounded, because then the electric fields drain out. And so the adapter that I found that conveys grounding is the Phoinex adapter. It's spelled F-O-I-N-N-E-X. The other ones I've tested don't convey grounding. So you use that in conjunction. So the Phoinex adapter, you use shielded Ethernet cable like Cat7, and then you use an Ethernet grounding adapter kit, which is sold by electrahealth.com. And if you use those three components, not only do you eliminate the wireless, because now you can put your phone on airplane mode, but you also reduce the electric fields from that phone. So when you're out and about, there's not much you can do if you need to use your cell phone. But what I recommend is keep it in airplane mode if you don't need it, and then just turn it on every once in a while and check it. Also, turn off Bluetooth or Wi-Fi on the phone if it's not something you use. And you can also go into you can turn off 4G in the settings, and so the phone will default to 3G, which will reduce the power. So those are just a few of the things you can do to reduce your exposures. So what about 5G? I get a lot of questions about this. So 5G stands for fifth generation. And 1G was just talk. 2G, or second generation, was talk and text. 3G was talk, text, and internet. 4G now includes streaming and downloading. And so what 5G really is, it's the next generation, and it just means what's coming next. People think that 5G is a technology, a specific technology, and that's a little bit of a misconception, and we're going to talk about that. But basically, 5G is to connect things, not people. It's for the Internet of Things, so self-driving cars, things like that, and for fast downloading speed. And it's not for talk and text at this point. So people often ask me, or they'll tell me, they look on their router and they'll say, I have 5G, I'm seeing 5G on my router. Well, that actually stands for 5 gigahertz, and it's very different from 5G, which is fifth generation, completely separate. Routers have generally, most routers will have 2 different frequencies that they transmit at, 2.4 gigahertz and 5.8 gigahertz. And so when you see 5G on your router, that's just sort of a shortened way of meaning that 5 gigahertz. So in order to understand what's going on with 5G, we have to talk about frequencies. So you're going to have to bear with me as I go through this. So current cellular services up to 4G, currently they use 7 megahertz to 2,500 megahertz. And 2,500 megahertz is also 2.5 gigahertz. So 1,000 megahertz is 1 gigahertz. So that's the range of cell towers today. So what are the carriers doing for 5G? So these frequencies, we divide them into 3 different bands. There's low band, mid band, and high band. So low band is 600 megahertz to 1,000 megahertz or 1 gigahertz. And that's pretty similar to what's being used today. So T-Mobile is using 600 megahertz, and AT&T is using 850 megahertz for 5G. So when you hear that T-Mobile is rolling out their nationwide 5G, they're using 600 megahertz for this. Okay? So mid-band is 1 gigahertz to 6 gigahertz. And we know those frequencies too because those are the frequencies that very close to what we measure wireless routers. So Sprint is using 2.5 gigahertz and Verizon 5.2 gigahertz. So the high band, this is the one that everybody associates with 5G. These are they're greater than 20 gigahertz. And these are the ones that they're the millimeter waves. They are so, the frequency is millimeters. Each wave is only less than maybe a half an inch or so. And these are the types of waves that have to be beamformed to get into your home. And so this is what people associate with 5G. But you can see that Sprint has no presence in the high band area or band, and T-Mobile and AT&T have both low band and high band. So now we're going to talk about each of those bands and what it means and how and what the carriers are. Go into this in a little more detail, and then how do you protect yourself? Okay, so the low band, and that's T-Mobile and AT&T. It's similar, as I was saying, to frequencies that are currently used for cell towers. The signals can travel for miles, slow to moderate download speed. These signals are always on, and it's continuous RF that is just exposing our homes, and that's there all the time. It passes easily through walls and windows, and it's easy to measure with our current meters. And you can shield it with the same kinds of materials that we use today to shield cell towers. You can shield it with foil, there's special shielded paint, there's window film, and there's special fabrics. And beamforming is not possible in the low band. It's only at about 2 gigahertz that beamforming is even possible. So the mid-band is 1 gigahertz to 6 gigahertz. And I mentioned that Sprint and Verizon, and it's the only one that Sprint is using for 5G. And this band is also being used for 4G, LTE Advanced, and the new 5G. And this new 5G is also called 5G Lite by the industry. They've nicknamed it. This signal can still travel quite a distance for miles, and it's always on and always exposing our homes and neighborhoods. Again, it can pass easily through walls and windows. Beamforming is possible with this band. It's easy to measure with our current meters, and shielding is still possible with the paint and foil, etc. The high band, 20 plus gigahertz. So as I mentioned, these are the very short millimeter waves. They can only go through walls with beamforming. And what beamforming is the wave is concentrated, and it becomes this very, very narrow beam that can then go through a wall or a window. Without beamforming, it won't even go through water. And the thing about this type of frequency is it's on demand only. So with all the other frequencies, it's constantly emitting. But with these millimeter waves, you have to have a special phone, either the low band 5G or the high band 5G. You have to have a different phone, and that phone has to call for or ask for a connection. Otherwise, those antennas are not sending out a signal. These signals only travel a few blocks. Honestly, I don't even know if that's true, because I've seen a video by Verizon where they did a test, of these high frequency millimeter waves, and they were showing really fast download speeds at a mile away, or I'm sorry, about a half a mile away. So, this is the best that we know to this day or right now, and things are changing so fast that in 6 months from now, we'll have more information, but this is what we know now. Also, to connect with these high millimeter waves, you must be stationary to stay connected. As soon as you move to the side, you can drop the signal, and then it defaults back to 4G. I've heard that they have not had real good success with the testing that they're doing of this. So that's what I'm hearing. Very, very fast download speeds. So what are they actually installing in regard to this type of high frequency? So for T-Mobile, it's limited to a few streets in a few areas in 6 cities. That's what they're doing now. And what they're doing is they're locating them in very dense areas where there's a lot of people, like arenas, stadiums, airports, places like that where there could be a lot of people that could make use of it. AT&T, it's for business customers only, and it's again, in very limited areas, like within only a couple of streets in a few areas in 25 cities. And Verizon has limited this, again, to those very dense areas in 31 cities, and they're including NFL stadiums. These types of frequencies cannot be measured with our current meters. Like my meters only go up to 10 gigahertz, and this starts at over 20 gigahertz. But there are new meters that are under development that I understand will be able to measure them, and these meters I understand, should cost under $1,000. So $1,000. So I'm waiting to learn more, and I'm waiting to hear from my colleagues about such meters before I purchase something. These cannot be shielded easily with some of the materials that we currently use. So only the paint and the foil and Aronia fabric is also supposed to block it. But the fabrics like Swiss Shield Daylight and Swiss Shield Naturel just are not effective for blocking it. And so for now, what you can do, if you avoid getting a phone with 5G capability, at least in your own home, it won't go into your home. If your neighbor has a phone with this capability and they make a call with that phone or they call for it, it's not going to go into your home. So what carriers are currently doing, there's a big build out right now. And I'm hearing that, at least in the Bay Area, what most people are seeing are the 4G LTE Advanced. They're also installing a big rollout of the low band and mid band 5G. And this is a very serious issue because all of these, the 4G LTE, the 5G low band and mid band, because they're going in residential neighborhoods and very close to people's homes. And while they might not be as powerful as the big cell towers, because they're so close to people's homes, people are getting very high exposure from them. I measured one outside someone's home. It was outside someone's home, and I got on the second floor of their bedroom, I was getting about 40, 50,000. And I had to tell them, you just cannot sleep in that bedroom without a bed canopy. So it's just really serious if it goes in near your home. You can control the devices in your own home, but it's much more expensive to shield your home against something that, an external source that's very high. So on that note, just, thank you for listening to this, and just a little of what I do for a minute. I do EMF home inspections, and so I go into people's homes and measure and help them reduce exposures. And I also help people who are buying homes and they want to make sure there's no showstoppers. And I also do phone consults if people have questions for me. And so right now, what I'd like to do is open it up for questions. And if you could come to the mic in front, if you'd like to ask a question, please come up to the front.
I was curious. The newer homes have the power lines like in the ground, or
Yes,
and the older homes have them above.
yes,
Do you see a difference in how it affects the homes?
yes. Okay. If you have, excuse me. If you have underground power lines, it can be lower than what I find with above ground power lines. But if you have power lines and you live in a residential neighborhood and it's just the local distribution line, it's generally not an issue. We like it under 1 milligauss, and I'll typically measure 0.3 milligauss. And if you have underground wiring, it can be less than that. It can be less than 0.1. But even underground wiring, sometimes there can be stray current that runs along those underground cables. So you can still possibly have high magnetic fields from that. You can never assume. Anytime I assume something that always is one way or always another way, I find myself that I find an exception to it. But in general, it can be less.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. You just mentioned you might need a bed canopy. What is that?
So a bed canopy it's a canopy for your bed that's made with special fabric.
Is that like a 4-poster bed and you put it above?
There's different products that are sold. Some of them look like it looks like a big mosquito net, and they can hang from a hoop. Or some of them you put 3 dowels in the ceiling and they hang from that. But you don't have to have a special type of bedpost. But it's made with fabric that has some of the fabrics are like polyester or cotton, and in each thread has metal in it, which then shields against that radio frequency. Looks like regular fabric.
Thank you.
You mentioned a medical diagnostic code.
Yes.
Do you know what it is?
ICD 10-90, I believe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If that doesn't work.
If you do a Google search, ICD code non-ionizing radiation, you should find it.
Got it. Thank you.
First question is a 2-part question. Have you heard in some cities they're going to be rolling out the 5G high band antennas in residential neighborhoods? And if so, how extensive and how concerning is that?
I've heard of it. Actually, one of my colleagues was just telling me that there was one in a residential neighborhood here in the Bay Area, probably near a big area. In my opinion, if I had to choose between the two, I would choose that over a low band 5G or a 4G advanced LTE, because the others emit all the time, and the high band millimeter waves only emit when it's called by a phone. I mean, that's my take on it.
Okay, so they're not going to be using those for like appliances or Wi-Fi in homes. I'm talking about the 5G high band.
I'm not, okay, I don't know. And we're continuing to learn. I've also heard that if you want it in your home, that you have to have a special device attached to your home which will bring it into the home. And then it can be spread throughout the house. We're still learning, but I understand at this point it's primarily being marketed like as an outdoor service.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yes, I just wanted to say that this copper mesh, as I started using recently,
Yeah.
has been very effective against wireless devices, cell towers. I'm extremely sensitive.
Yes.
I don't have any wireless at all. I don't have a cell phone, So I've been trying for a long time to find something that would be effective, and this has been doing very well.
Yes.
Better than anything else
That's
I've
great.
used. So, yeah. Don't forget to give your website too before we leave.
Okay,
So-
thanks.
so-
Yeah, my
thank you.
website is emfhealthy.com.
There it is. Thank you.
There's really good clothing that I've seen online which can help people, like with the hoodies, the sweatshirts. Yeah, and I've heard really good things that they can help people. Some people react to the metal in them. It's not guaranteed, but try it.
Absolutely. I use that sometimes in combination with this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just wanted to get a couple of your recommendations.
Okay.
I know in the past you've mentioned like a router that has a switch that you can switch off at night. Do you have a name of that?
Yeah, so the router that I like best are the Netgear routers because they have an easy on-off button for wireless. And so for many other routers, you have to go online, put in the IP address. It's hard to turn the wireless off and on. The caveat with the Netgear routers is when you've got the wireless on, the newer ones can be really powerful. So I recommend that one to people who want to still use wireless, but the best solution is not to use wireless in your home. And it is possible. I mean, I use no wireless in my home, and honestly, I'm not sensitive to it, but I do it because for my health and for my long-term health. And you can have just about all the same functionality that you do with wireless. So it's really how you want to use your technology.
That's right. And then you mentioned some solar recommendations. I didn't write those down. Can you
Okay.
repeat those?
Yes. So these are the ones that I've tested as clean. The N-phase microinverters, IQ7, IQ8, IQ9, and that's a local company in Petaluma. And also, N-phase, and it's ENPHASE. Microinverters, where each one of the panels has its own little microinverter. Now, with this said, and it gets kind of complicated, for people who are extremely sensitive, there can still be a little bit of dirty electricity coming from the panels themselves. But these companies, anything on the wiring in the walls, which is what we typically find the big issue, it's clean. The other one that we've measured is clean is the Solar Edge HD Wave, and it's the SE model. And that's where you have one single inverter, for example, that converts all of the DC to AC. It's called a string inverter.
You said Solar Edge HD Wave, and it's the HD model?
SE, like S is in Sam, E is in Edward.
Okay. That leads to my next question. Do you recommend a particular dirty electricity device?
Like filters, you mean?
Yeah.
So the thing with the filters is some people do better with them. From what I've heard, about 30% feel better with those filters, 30% feel worse, and 30% feel no difference. So I've used them. I like them to block dirty electricity coming in from the grid. And I like GreenWave, but GreenWave or Stetzer, they kind of do the same thing. I'm not a big fan of putting them inside your house because they also increase magnetic fields.
Right.
And if you don't feel better with it, then I'd say no point.
Right. And then the last question I have is, you mentioned how to ground an iPhone. Is that the same for an iPad
Yes.
to hardwire?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Because my son uses a communication device as an iPad. So the only thing we've been doing is putting it on airplane mode and making sure, like at school, they have it on airplane mode.
Yeah.
But I like these other tips to try to hardwire it as well.
Yeah.
I think that would be good. Thank you
Good.
very much.
Welcome.
Yes, one idea that I've always had is why doesn't the router have an option where the user can set a quiet period from like 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. and then the Wi-Fi will come back on automatically. You don't have to.
Some people do that with a timer, and it'll cut the power to it. And I've heard of some people doing that, and that's better because anything you can do to reduce your exposures is a good thing.
Okay. Yeah, just for the power. Okay. Yeah, and if they did that on the iPhone itself, having a quiet period, that would be just a software change. So,
Yeah.
well, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not so sure you'll have the answer for this, but my daughter lives in London, and their power is, I think, 220 volts,
Yes.
straight line,
Yes.
compared to our alternating. Is there a difference over there with the EMFs compared to here?
So my understanding, so we have 120, but you can still have 220 here, like for appliances, where they take two 120 wires and you get 220. And in Europe, they use all 220, and so I believe that's why electric fields can be a bigger issue in Europe than they are here. And building biology actually started in Germany, and that could be why building biology focuses on electric fields also. My understanding is that many EMF consultants don't focus on electric fields, but they focus on the other three. And electric fields are a very important one to focus on.
Okay, thank you.
The voltage in Europe is 240, but it's still alternating current.
Thank you. Yeah. The gentleman just said it's still alternating current, not straight or DC in Europe.
I have a few questions. First, are more simple. The router in my house, I have on my computer, I have the wireless turned off. Is the router still emitting stuff?
Yes.
Even with,
Great question. Great question. People sometimes they'll physically connect it. They will turn off the wireless maybe on their computer.
Right.
And they'll say, I'm hardwired. There's nothing emitting. And I'll come in and that router is still emitting. So they're independent of each other. And I always tell people, like if I give them advice on things to reduce, get a basic meter that you can verify that it's turned off. I can't tell you how many times, if I've come back and I still find it emitting. And the one that I like the best is either for wireless, is either the Safe and Sound Classic or Safe and Sound Pro. And those are sold by Safe Living Technologies, slt.co.
but there isn't a way to turn the wireless off on the router. I used to have a router that didn't have wireless at all, and it burned out at some point. And Sonic makes you use their own router, and it's got wireless.
You should be
built
able to
into it.
turn it off. I've never met Well, Comcast, it's really hard to turn off, but all the others, it's easier to turn off. But for Comcast, I recommend a separate modem and router because it's so hard to get the wireless turned off on Comcast. But there are solutions for all of these where you can get the router not to emit. It just can vary depending on your provider.
Okay. And then the other thing was with the cordless phones, am I understanding that even if you're not taking the phone off the base and walking around with it, the base is still emitting?
Yes, constantly.
Okay. And then do you have any recommendations for when you send your kid to school and you have no control and all the schools think it's wonderful that they have all these wireless computers now and the kids are on them all the time?
It's really a tough situation, and some of the parents locally are talking to schools and making inroads for that. And so, as a matter of fact, Stephanie Kirst is right here in the audience, and Stephanie, raise your hand. Stephanie is in Menlo Park, and she's really made progress with getting the schools to listen to her. And the only other thing you can do, and you could talk to her for some suggestions, and the only other thing you can do is make your home as safe as possible, and especially where the kids sleep, so that at least your children are getting as much time as possible to recover.
Nothing you can kind of like send them to school with to, I don't know, help protect them or...
I mean, my sons are 24, and they put Wi-Fi in the schools when they were in 9th grade, and it was tough for me, and as a parent, you hate to send your child to school like that.
Okay. Thanks.
Hi, Liz. I have several questions. First of all, what do you think of fast fiber? Is that an improvement over, just a modem and a router?
It's a way of fiber is a way of bringing or delivering the service to your house. For people who are extremely electrical sensitive, they actually can react to that because it's so fast. And in those cases, we try and slow it down with slower routers.
Oh, I didn't know you could slow it down, that you could adjust it.
Well, when I mean slow it down is I recommend for my most sensitive clients, there is a router by TrendNet, and it's only 300 megabits per second, which is actually kind of slow, and it doesn't have any wireless, and that's the one I recommend if people are willing or know that they're not going to use wireless in their house. And
I see. Okay.
so it just depends on the situation.
So what I mean is, so if you get fast fiber instead of one of these other options, is that cleaner? I guess that's the word.
So fast fiber is just a way to delivering it to your home. My understanding is you'd still need a modem and router.
Right. So that modem or router, it's not any reduced in what it emits with the fast fiber?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I can't answer that one.
Okay.
I believe that the modem and the router would the router would still transmit at what its speed was.
Right. But we don't know if it's any vast improvement over the technology before.
For people who are really sensitive to it, it could be an issue.
Okay. So can you talk about, like, if you have a circuit panel or a power line, what can we do to protect from those?
Okay, power lines. If you have high magnetic fields from power lines, that's the one kind of thing that there really isn't anything you can do about it. There have been a few cases where I've seen that, and it is an unfixable problem. And the only thing, if it's really high, the only thing I can advise people is to move. It's just, in the U.S., there is no legal threshold for what magnetic fields can be.
Oh, okay. And how about just like a circuit panel?
So
like in
a
house?
circuit panel can give off magnetic fields also. And the best thing you can do for that is simply not have a bed within about 8 feet at least of the panel, and generally then it's okay.
Okay, and what if it is in a bedroom?
The panel, I would say keep it away from that. There are ways that it can be shielded with special metals, but it may or may not be successful.
Oh, okay. And smart meters, you mentioned shielding smart meters. Because I think the main thing is that it's just a square with the dials that
Yes.
needs to be covered, right?
So you can shield the outside. There's a couple of products. There's Smart Meter Guard from Com. I like that one. But remember, the back of the smart meter, if there's any, it's a metal plate. It's not designed to be a shield, and there can be gaps in that plate, and so the signal can still go inside directly behind it. And the only way you know is to test it. So the guard will protect it from radiating out in all directions, but you still need to confirm if it's not coming from behind the meter.
Oh, okay. Because there's some that are just like a cloth that
Yeah.
drape over it, and there's some that are like covers, like mesh covers.
Yeah, they're basically the same. It's the same principle for all of those, and you could have that same issue for all of those because there could still be the signal getting through the back.
The little gap, so you have to just batten it down whatever
What,
way.
what I tell people, if they can't test it or if they're going to do that after I leave, you can take, let's say, a 3x3 piece of heavy-duty foil, and you can put that on the inside wall where the back of the meter is, so that you're blocking that smart meter.
Okay. 3x3 feet, you're
Yeah,
foil
yeah.
the backside. Okay. And
Okay.
can you just go over, I didn't quite get when you were talking about hardwiring the cell phone, use a Phoenix adapter.
Let me, because I know they want to wrap it up, let me talk to you.
Okay.
All
right.
We'll talk offline, and
Okay, good.
I'll give you that.
All right, great, thanks.
So let's give Liz a round of applause.
Thank you.